All right. Thanks everybody for joining today. Really excited to chat with this group. As a quick apology out of the gates here, I'm a little under the weather, but show must go on. So hopefully my voice is still relatively easy to understand. I'm really happy to be joined by this group today. I think it's an awesome cross section of, kind of merchants, 3PLs and operators in the space that understand a lot about the current market environment and how brands and 3PLs are navigating together through this. We've only got about an hour today. Usually that goes fast. So what we'll do here is we'll kick off with a round of intros. I'll keep mine short, and then I'll kind of direct us from here. So uh, everybody, I'm Kyle Bertin. I'm the co-founder and CEO of Two Boxes. We build return processing software that serves dozens of 3PLs and hundreds of brands across the globe. We help those returns effectively. We say returns become an asset when you work with Two Boxes. And through this journey, I've been able to meet these three guys on the call. And when we were thinking about putting together a panel of, how could we, have something, sort of intelligent and hopefully helpful to say about the current landscape in regards to tariffs. This was the group that we really thought of right away. So really excited to have Alex, Matt, and Chad here. Maybe what I'll do is I'll kick it over to Alex to start. Alex, if you can tell us a little bit about your background and your company, and then we can go from there.
Yeah, thanks, Kyle, and thanks for having me. Alex Kent, I lead partnerships and strategy here at Stored. So Stored is a e-commerce 3PL primarily, but more of a commerce enablement company. And what we really try to do is combine the physical aspect of operations and logistics from port to porch and porch back to the warehouse, but also the technology that operators and brands need to help sell more, reduce headaches, and eliminate costs or reduce their costs. So obviously, a lot of our customers are affected by the recent global trade announcements, and excited for the conversation today.
Awesome. Thank you, Alex. Matt, you want to go next for us?
Sure. Thanks, Kyle, for having me. Full disclosure, I'm a very happy and active advisor of the Two Boxes team. I wouldn't be advising them if I didn't think they were an excellent software that brands and 3PL should be using. So Matt Hertz, I am the CEO and founder of Third Person, which is a platform to help connect brands, e-commerce brands with 3PLs. I'm also fortunate to have Alex and his team at Stored on the platform as well. My background is really from the brand side. So I've worked at a few high growth brands earlier in my career, companies like Rent the Runway and Birchbox. Sort of pivoted that experience to running a consulting business called Second Marathon, sort of like a fractional operations consultancy. And then last year launched Third Person to help brands discover and connect with 3PLs. So really excited to be here and share a little bit of knowledge about what I'm hearing from both 3PLs and brands as it relates to duties, tariffs, and all the latest news out there.
Awesome. Thank you, Matt. Thanks for being here. Chad, you want to go last here?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for having me, Kyle. Excited to be on this panel with you guys. Started my e-commerce journey, what feels like forever ago now, back at Walmart e-commerce. Then moved on to Made in Cookware, where I was lucky enough to meet Kyle and the Two Boxes guys, kind of be an early partner with you guys. And at the time we were running our own fulfillment and got to deploy Two Boxes in our fulfillment center. And very soon we'll be using it again via our Stored relationship, where I'm the head of operations now at True Classic, overseeing fulfillment, logistics, sourcing, and production. So some pretty relevant topics for the discussion today.
Awesome. Thanks, Chad. And for those on the call, you can always put comments and questions in the chat here. We'll kind of take some Q&A, I think, throughout, but then also at the end. I just wanted to set the stage a little bit, some data points that really stood out to me, coming into this call. There was a great survey that went out through the DTC newsletter, and just some highlights here, and then I want to get some reaction from the panel. So 36% of respondents in that survey said that tariffs are going to have a severe impact on their business. 40% said tariffs will impact their next PO. 72% of respondents said that they plan to raise prices. And 60% of respondents said that they are somewhat confident, that they're only somewhat confident or very uncertain about their ability to navigate tariffs in the next 12 months. So I think there's a lot of, kind of uncertainty and doubt out there. Just to kick it off, maybe I'll pick on Matt and Alex as an opener here. And you guys can, kind of popcorn here who wants to go first. What are brands asking you in this environment? And any common questions or things that you've been helping them address?
I think for us, the conversations started, as far back as August of last year when the election was coming up, and people were evaluating if Trump won, what was he going to do, and this all kind of started in 2016 with some of the implications he put on tariffs back then. But so some of the conversations started happening then, and then obviously December you had some changes in the IMEX program. You've had disruptions in the carrier and parcel delivery networks. So the conversations are continuing to go. Obviously, there's a lot more brands now that are coming to us and asking questions specifically, on inventory plays with bonded facilities and FTZ facilities. And Matt, I know you are fielding a lot of those questions, but just looking for different strategies on, hey, are these tariffs on China going to stick around? And if so, what do we do? And I think we've already helped a number of brands through the IMEX changes with our 13 facilities here in North America, 11 in the States, 2 in Canada, and being able to be flexible and nimble and launch new brands quickly. That's what they're looking for out of a new provider too. So
Thanks,
Yeah,
Alex. Matt, yeah, go for it, bud.
yeah, sure. Yeah, I think a lot of the sentiment that Alex has shared is kind of resonates with amongst the conversations I've had with brands and 3PLs. I think at the highest of high levels, brands are asking like, what the hell's going on, right? Like, what do I do? Do I panic? Do I make a change in the next 30 days that will be a years long, that will have years long implications? Or do I just kind of sit and wait and see what will happen in the next hour, in the next day, in the next quarter, in the next year? My recommendation to brands has always been like, let's, while you don't necessarily need to make a change in the next 30 days, let's be aware of what our options are. And Alex mentioned bonded warehouses, bonded facilities. I'm sure we can talk about that later in this call. Slash FTZs, free trade zones. Bonded warehouses are certainly becoming a very popular topic. Candidly, it's the most common question I've gotten in the last week to 2 weeks is, what is this bonded warehouse thing? And does it make sense for me? There are a limited number of according to Claude, AI tool, there's about 250 bonded facility operators in the United States. So actually a very limited number. I also believe there's over 10,000 3PLs in the United States, so a very small percentage of them. So does that make sense? As Alex said, like, how do I incorporate the margin impact of the tariffs as we know it today, into my product, right? When most, when most e-commerce brands on average have a fairly thin margin. And I'm not going to ask Chad what True Classics margin is by any means, but he could probably talk a little bit about kind of typical margins, with sort of D2C apparel brands. I mean, if you're running a 15% net margin, you are killing it. And now, if you're producing your product in China and there's currently 145% margin, on the value of the product, that is hugely impactful. So it's a lot of brands just asking, what are my options? And let's try to be thoughtful in evaluating which option is best for my business looking forward.
That's awesome. Thanks, Matt. Chad, I mean, I think maybe I'll pick on you next. I know that this has been something that you've been evaluating for a long time. It wasn't news to you that these things were coming. Can you kind of walk us through like how did you and your teams plan for this, and how have you been responding right now? What are you monitoring?
Yeah, I think the team, far before my tenure, really saw the writing on the wall as it related to China specifically, and I think we all kind of saw that one coming, both as it relates to tariffs as well as just the treatment under Section 321 and de minimis thresholds related to China product. And, the team really did a great job in being diligent and moving that manufacturing to other geographies. And, I think a lot of people did the same thing. And I think the manufacturers themselves saw the writing on the wall and stood up manufacturing footholds in other geographies such as Cambodia and Vietnam, and even some in Kenya and other areas of development. Um, I don't think we anticipated, and I'd be interested to hear if anyone really did, sort of the first round of the reciprocal tariffs that were put in place and now hard hit some of those geographies that we particularly took advantage of were, with Cambodia getting a 49% tariff, just as a reference, right? Vietnam, 36%. That was a bit of a shock and, frankly, a pretty scary realization for us in our business and our margin profile. The thing that has sort of been the wake up call for us, both, as someone who oversees sourcing and manufacturing, as well as, our fulfillment and logistics side of the business is, during these tumultuous times where policy is very volatile, trying to not have our reactions to those be very volatile, but for us to just keep as many options on the table as possible, right? So, things are definitely going to continue to change, and we need to be ready to source product out of additional locations in Southeast Asia. We need to have locations in Central and South America that are ready for us to move manufacturing volume there. We need to have fulfillment that can be flexible to bringing product into the US or deferring bringing that product in. I think we're all sort of also waiting with bated breath about what the future for Section 321 looks like for non-China product, where the timeline has been very nebulous on what that looks like. So yeah, just, we all know that there are going to be a lot of changes, and I think we've been shown that it's going to be more volatile than maybe we had anticipated. And I'm just trying to keep as many options in play as possible just to be able to react to those in a thoughtful but also swift manner when they come.
That's awesome. Chad, thanks for that. I think what we'll do here is we'll move, after we set the stage here, I wanted to move a little bit into more like, kind of tactical things for brands. So maybe I'll keep it going with you, Chad. You guys did make a lot of changes in the supply chain recently. Like what kind of like made you, have the confidence to change some of those things? We talked about sourcing, sounds like sourcing you guys were well ahead of, but
Yeah.
maybe could you talk us through kind of the fulfillment and logistics side of things and some of the changes that you made at a high level, and like, why you had the confidence to make those?
For sure. I mean, this was another sort of unanticipated, policy change, sort of early in my tenure at True Classic. No way to prove your worth to a new organization than have to deal with some legislative changes, right? A supply chain crisis. We certainly didn't anticipate, some of the Mexico changes relative to IMEX that happened at the end of last year, and I think that caught a lot of people by surprise. We're just in a position where I think we were shown that we were a bit susceptible to risk and not well diversified from a fulfillment perspective when that came about. Being able to move quickly, and Alex, obviously we were pretty vocal about the help that Stored provided us during that period of time to just be able to accept the scale of our business and kind of quickly react from a technology perspective to integrate and allow us to kind of ship orders in a short fashion. At the time we were unable to receive any product to our fulfillment center servicing the US at the time. So it was definitely a scary realization to wake up to. And as we look at that sort of shock and the realization there, I just go back to the comment about keeping options in play. The bet that we made in moving to Stored was that, moving some of our fulfillment to Stored, was that our incremental cost of importing product to the US would be covered by reducing outbound shipping to the customer by being a bit closer to the customer, and then an added benefit of a reduction in time in transit for those orders. And thus far, that business case is proving to play out well. So it was a good bet on our behalf. But I go back to the comment about keeping options in play, and when tariffs are high, having fulfillment in other geographies where we can take advantage of Section 321 is also critically important to us. So just trying to keep as many irons in the fire and just provide our business with as many alternatives as possible to kind of wade through these policy changes.
Really helpful. Thank you, Chad. Matt and Alex, I'll kick it back to you guys, and kind of whoever wants to start here would be great. Like, what questions are you getting right now from brands about kind of fulfillment capabilities, right? So Alex, when people are coming to you, what were they asking you? And then Matt, when brands are looking for new fulfillment providers through third person, what are they asking? And then also, what do you think like they should be asking that maybe they aren't asking today?
Yeah, I think, a lot of what Chad said is, what does that cost look like? What's the operational cost going to look like if you domesticate your fulfillment here in the States? Which nodes make sense? Do I need 2, 3 fulfillment nodes? Do I need 4? How can you help me in other countries? How can you help me ship internationally so you're still fulfilling those orders and reaching those consumers? I think, to answer the second question is the staying power of the 3PL, right? How's the 3PL operating and how's your fulfillment partner operating? Fulfillment is like a marriage, right? And you have to choose a partner that's going to communicate with you, but also, how financially stable are they? You don't want to pick up and move 2 to 3 times in 2 to 3 years. You want to have longer term relationships and be able to be supportive of those brands that you're signing on. So I think that's one of the things to look at is, what does the leadership team look like? How financially stable are those organizations, and what's the staying power of the partner as you are evaluating different fulfillment?
Alex, I say all the time that fulfillment is like marriage, but I told my wife that she's like fulfillment, and she did not like that. So, uh, but no, I do say that all the time. It's absolutely right. I think many people think that selecting a fulfillment provider, a 3PL, is like a transactional decision. They think it's like finding a hotel for the weekend, where if it doesn't work out, or an Airbnb, right? If it doesn't work out, no big deal. It's probably not going to be too bad. And next time, you go to that destination, you'll stay somewhere else. But this relationship's really important. And I think what's kind of underlying in what Alex said is that the best partner you can choose will be the cheapest partner. And cheap is not defined by the initial pricing proposal you receive from half a dozen 3PLs. Cheap is defined by like the total cost of managing a partner. And I've worked with literally hundreds of brands, helping them find the right or helping them through the process. And ultimately it's the brand's decision, right? Just like if you're dating and you ask your best friend, oh, who should I actually date, or who should I marry? It's ultimately your decision who you want to take the next steps with. But there have been times where brands are gravitating towards the lower cost solution. That's not to say the low cost solution may not be the best solution for you. If that works out, fantastic. But there's often costs that you don't necessarily see in a spreadsheet that are real. So, what I'm sort of wrangling with right now, given all the excitement around bonded facilities and free trade zones and some of these other opportunities in the spaces, Chad, you were kind of hitting on this when you were talking about selecting Stored for some of your logistics needs, for some of True Classics logistics needs, is that like maybe if Stored was the best partner for True Classic at that moment in time, which it sounds like they absolutely were, maybe just choosing that more expensive option. Maybe it doesn't have all like the cool bells and whistles of being a bonded facility or enabling Section 321 or anything else. But like if you really align with the management team, the operators on the ground at that specific, in this case, Stored facility, who you really resonate with, who you can talk to, who you can communicate with, who are doing a good job, that might be less expensive than all this whiplash that I know a lot of brands are kind of pursuing just to find what on in an Excel spreadsheet indicates to be the lesser cost option. So I think that point you made, Alex, is really important about really thinking about this as a marriage where there's lots of variables and inputs into the ultimate decision.
Thanks, Matt. Awesome. I wanted to talk about, talk about two other things in this section. First is maybe Chad, and Alex and Matt can jump in as well. Are there any like specific kind of more, I'll call it, advanced tactics that brands are looking at right now or should be looking at, right? Some of the things that I hear about is obviously bonded warehouses, but also certain people shipping direct from overseas, people looking at kind of tariff engineering in certain ways. And then also I hear a lot more interest in things like duty drawback than I did, a year ago. I think a lot of brands didn't even know what that was. Can you maybe talk through that, like things that you think are like, relative appropriately hyped versus overhyped, and anything that you guys are taking pretty seriously from that regard?
Yeah, I think it's a yes and conversation to everything you just listed. I mean, I certainly, with the announcement, I guess almost 2 weeks ago now, and to the extent to which that some of those tariffs were originally communicated, I think it had brands looking at all options and trying to think creatively about all those solutions and then some, right? So yes, I think all of those have been topics that have been in conversation with us today, as well as having some hard conversations about new product launches and development in the pipeline and open purchase orders, where maybe that's not a business we want to be in anymore, and kind of forcing some of those conversations that maybe we would have not had in terms of SKU rationalization and assortment changes, that just maybe is not a business that makes sense for us anymore. I think the biggest change that we are going through in a business is really just evaluating how we identify and source and vet and bring on board manufacturing partners. To us, as well as any business, right? Like, quality is paramount, and we wouldn't make any sacrifices on one that impacted quality of the product at the end of the day. So making sure we go through all that right process. But while it's not, maybe the most technologically advanced solution or really like a creative thought, I mean, it really is just a wake-up call for us to just make sure that we can be nimble on where and how we get products manufactured. Because to us, at the end of the day, like, fulfilling from Asia where our product is made, like, yes, that might have some benefits, but that's certainly a change that the customer is going to see in terms of shipping speeds and things like that. And I don't know that that's a direction that we really want to go. And of course, we're exploring it, and we'll answer the question. But there are things that we can do that have less direct customer facing impacts that are going to be our first opportunities for sure.
That's awesome. Matt or Alex, anything you guys want to add there?
Yeah, I can jump in first this time, Alex. I think Kyle, you mentioned duty drawbacks as an example. I'm certainly not an expert on that. Looks like we do have an attendee on this call who is an expert on that. A company called Caspian, meetcaspian.com. I'm not incentivized by them. I just know they're a great provider. They help brands, brands like True Classic, with duty drawbacks. I think that's absolutely something that all brands should evaluate. It takes time to, sort of get up and running with that program. So why not start now? And also, I know there's a handful of 3PLs on this call and other providers, Caspian and platforms like that, partners like that, are ones that you should absolutely be recommending, encouraging your clients to use. And I think from a 3PL's perspective, I think today is a really good opportunity. When I say today, where we are with everything going on, it's a really good opportunity to introduce your clients who listen to you, who respect you, who are kind of leaning on you to be sort of de facto consultants for them, to them, recommending these types of solutions to help them save some margin. So whether it's duty drawback, obviously 2boxes is an incredible platform to allow you to, essentially resell or make use of inventory, of returns that traditionally is kind of like an afterthought, right? I mean, I know Kyle knows the exact percentage, but directionally, I believe, 1 in 5 things that are sent out are returned, about 20% of e-commerce-ish are returned. And I know in talking to Kyle that much of that 20% is not actually re-merchandised, resold. And that's a huge, huge. And by the way, like that stuff is not dutiable the second time, right? Because it's going from, my home in Nashville back to, Alex's 3PL, Stored's 3PL, in any market. So really being mindful of these opportunities that are generally lower hanging fruit, that aren't requiring these massive operational changes, are really interesting opportunities to save some of that margin that might now be going to Uncle Sam.
Thanks, Matt. Appreciate that. Alex, anything you want to add here?
Yeah, I think just a couple of other things is, a lot of these D2C brands offer free shipping, and, evaluating, okay, what is that order value to achieve free shipping, and looking at that as a way to, pass some of that cost back to the end consumer, but also around the returns process, right? We're all used to this kind of free returns that Amazon has enabled us. And, is it really that feasible anymore for a mid-market D2C brand to be offering that? There is labor that goes into processing that return. There's great software that helps it make it more efficient, but there is that parcel label generation for that return as well. And I know we'll get into more return talk here shortly, but just looking at ways that you can pass some of that cost back to the consumer while still achieving and giving the consumer a great experience.
No, that's awesome. And actually, I guess Matt and Alex, you guys teed it up nicely. I did want to talk about returns a little bit. Obviously, I don't want to make this a two boxes sales pitch, but I just want to talk about, like, from your guys' perspective, how has the importance of returns changed from both kind of like the 3PL and the brand side in the last 5 to 10 years? And maybe we'll start there. So I guess Matt, maybe to mix it up a little bit, when you're talking to brands and 3PLs, like, how's the importance of returns changed recently?
Yeah, it's and again, not to make this a pitch about two boxes, I'm just kind of addressing what I see as kind of reality, and there's no sense in not embracing software platforms that are the right ones to partner with going forward. But I sort of mentioned this in my last comment, but returns have always been kind of an afterthought, right? Like I've walked into at least a couple hundred warehouses, but probably hundreds of warehouses over the last 15 years. And everyone you walk into, there's kind of this, like, I call it the graveyard, on the side of the warehouse, which is just all this crap, right? All this returns, collecting dust and cobwebs, and like no one knows, like everyone's afraid of that, right? I mean, back when I was at Birchbox, we're doing 1 million orders a month. We got a lot of returns, right? For any number of reasons, right? Rejections, RT, return to senders, et cetera. And it was always like the KPIs or the SLAs of most warehouse brand relationships. Like the number one thing that brands are typically concerned with is getting out today's orders today, right? It's like the outbound fulfillment, right? Like Matt orders a couple tees from True Classic, Chad's brand, which I've done many times. Like I expect that to ship really, really quickly. And Chad manages his 3PL partner accordingly. Returns is kind of that afterthought, right? It's like, just sort of get to it when you get to it, right? But like that is changing, right? And with 3PLs, it has historically been difficult to change that because they're tedious. Like everyone's a little bit different. It's like receiving eaches versus receiving like a fresh, clean pallet or a container of like well-labeled SKUs and cartons. So I think as the dynamic is changing and as platforms like two boxes make it more seamless and easier to receive, and frankly, as different RMA, returns management platforms like, Loop Returns, for example, make it easier for the customer, for the consumer to return it and integrate into platforms like two boxes. I think the tides are turning where 3PLs are starting to recognize that this is something that is important to brands. I mean, frankly, having represented many brands through the RFP, like I'm seeing 3PLs sell or pitch platforms like two boxes. And, I see Alex is kind of nodding to, and maybe Store does this. I can't recall exactly, so I don't want to put them on the spot, but I've seen a handful of 3PLs sell this as like a significant value added service. And when brands like True Classic see this, they're like, oh my gosh, like absolutely, this makes sense. And that's why I think the ability for brands and 3PLs to really embrace returns as a revenue driver, and not this like boring kind of graveyard side of the warehouse cost center that once a year when we do our physical inventory, some accountant is going to write it off and tell us what the amount is. Like, that is really, really important, particularly in this market where tariffs are quickly becoming a meaningful blocker or hurdle to brands.
Thanks, Matt. I really appreciate that. Alex, maybe I'll have you go because I want to end this section with Chad and ask a
Yeah.
few more specific questions on returns when it comes to the brand side. But please, anything you want to add?
No, I think, the returns section of the warehouse, if you're doing a facility tour, I was in our Kentucky building last week, touring with a brand, and we highlighted the returns for this apparel customer. And, how we process that, and, asking questions of like, what's the long end of the tail as far as processing returns, because it does affect the consumer experience too. A lot of that is going to be the parcel shipping and getting that back into the warehouse. It's not the actual processing time and getting it back to stock and available for resale. But you also kind of evaluate the when you refund that customer, and allowing that. So many brands today are issuing that refund on whenever that parcel label is first scanned. And as we talk about cash flow and how brands can respond to these tariffs, having a great returns process where you have a RPS, a returns processing system in place, allows you to actually check that you're getting the actual return, and the consumer's being honest, and then you can issue a refund. So like Matt said, through great RMA providers and software like 2boxes, you have the visibility as the 3PL to know what's coming. You can staff accordingly to what the returns are going to look like, but also have that capability to have it as a selling proposition during the sales cycle too.
Thanks, Alex. Chad, I wanted to kind of finish with you here. I mean, obviously you have the experience at Maiden and True Classic. Can you talk about just like how you've seen brands kind of reevaluate returns, and then really end to end, right? Not just inside of the warehouse, but I think a lot of brands, I'm going to get the stat wrong here, but just something that really has been interesting to me over the last few years is I think something like 60 to 70% of returns, or sorry, 60 to 70% of brands on, companies like Loop and Narvar and others are now starting to charge for returns, at least in some form or fashion. And then, obviously there's lots of other, things embedded here with fraud and abuse like Alex was getting at, but can you just talk through like how that the math of returns has kind of evolved for you guys, and where are the things that you're really trying to like button up that process?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, if I think back, Kyle, to kind of some of our original conversations, when I was back at Maiden and we were looking at deploying 2boxes in our fulfillment center, I always felt like, being an operator, the easiest way to get spend like this approved is to be able to say like, this spend is going to make us more efficient such that we're going to save costs like incremental to what the system cost us. And it was pretty easy for us to articulate that with 2boxes in terms of just kind of the I think you had some stats and I agree with them. I think we went from like 25 units per hour on returns processing to like 75 units per hour. So like it was easy for me to sell the system internally. I know this isn't a sales pitch for 2boxes, but it's just the reality of my experience. The real partnership though is the value that you create on top of that, right? And I think that's where we really saw the cycles come into place, where at the time it seemed like returns fraud was just a big topic in the D2C industry, and we were not exempt from that. It certainly was. We were one of the brands I think that had been identified in some of these groups online where somebody identifies that you are a Loop customer and that you have policies to refund at certain points in the reverse logistics process, as Alex mentioned, and folks were taking advantage of that. And so 2boxes became a critical part of the returns process for us to be able to validate that the customer is sending us back the right product, but to do so quickly so that they got their refund in a reasonable amount of time, and it wasn't, a 2-week delay on processing that return. Really the kind of unspoken, but I think biggest benefit of this is, we were in a facility where we were really utilizing and dependent upon temp labor. And, for us as a premium cookware company, or now as a, premium men's apparel company, again, quality is paramount, right? And for us to be able to, stand up a new operator who maybe has never seen our product before, but we can give them a very guided process on the things to look out for to know that a product is sellable again, so that we can take advantage of getting this product that we just paid all these tariffs and duties on back into inventory to sell again, but know that it's the right quality, and that a customer who then purchases that product is not going to get something that they are curious about what happened, and was this a returned product. So I think all of those points together like make it a really nice business case for brands to optimize on the returns process, and it's only going to become more important and more critical. The last thing that I'll say is like, having been on the journey with Made In and then now at True Classic, like there were these very well-defined gates as we built the business. And the first one is generate revenue and prove that a customer is going to buy your product. The next was build a profitable business. And, we thought that was the goalpost. And as soon as we got there, your investors tell you that now cash flow is the important milestone to achieve. And this is, squarely in that cash flow home, where the quicker you can get product back into sellable, as Alex was saying, and, generate the cash against that and get product back into the customer's hands, really is going to help you achieve that goal as you also are looking to build and scale a business. So anyway, I know that was a lot, but, returns are definitely at the center of all that for us.
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Chad. All right, so we're gonna move on to like the last kind of topic section here, and then we'll have some Q&A. It looks like there's already been one question thrown in the chat that we'll cover. So anybody, if you have questions, please get them in now, because we'll save the last like 10-15 minutes of the call for those. The last thing here, I think, is just turning more to kind of the fulfillment side of the aisle. And maybe Alex, I'll start with you here. Kind of first question is like, obviously a lot of things that you need to be good at as a 3PL and as a fulfillment partner to a brand like True Classic. How, like, are there specific areas where you think 3PLs are kind of separating themselves on winning versus losing in this environment? And can you kind of talk us through that?
Yeah, I think, what we hear a lot is we're providing through our technology platform, our order management system that we're integrating into Shopify or an ERP system, and, providing a lot of value through carrier diversity and diversification among the carrier mix to avoid disruptions in that market, right? And by working with a number of different carriers, I think we're up to 20, maybe 20 plus at this point. We have the ability to rate shop and look at, okay, which carriers work for this, and also looking at cost and how we can be most efficient for the brands. So, by leveraging that carrier diversification, we're able to avoid a lot of disruptions. If a number of carriers, Matt, I know you've talked about this a bunch, but have gone out of business recently, and with the impacts of UPS or USPS Parcel Select and Ground Advantage and the changes that are happening among the carriers, a lot of brands are feeling that. But the diversification is super important. And then I think just, I go back to the team again. How does your culture align with the 3PL's leadership team, the team on the floor that's fulfilling the orders, and what does that kind of look like, and how does that relationship work?
Matt, maybe I'll pick on you here. Like, you obviously see a lot of 3PLs, a lot of brands. I think, at least anecdotally, I hear that there's certain 3PLs winning a lot of business in this environment. What are the top list of reasons that you think 3PLs are closing more business than others in this environment?
Yeah, I touched on some of it earlier, and Alex did a pretty good job of expressing similar sentiment just now. But There are so many 3PLs in the United States, right? Like I think I mentioned this earlier at the start, but like conservatively over 10,000 3PLs in the United States, right? So you have many, many options. I've been in the business for over 15 years now, and I've probably met 300 3PLs. So a very small share of the total number. And I say that because what's most important is really finding one that resonates with you, whether it's, the communication and the culture that Alex just mentioned. Obviously pricing is important, right? Like, period, right? Like I've probably worked with one, maybe two brands, across the hundreds that said pricing is not important, right? Like, it's important, period. And even if they say it's not important, it's important to them, right? Operational performance is important, right? You need to get out today's orders today accurately, efficiently, and at a cost-effective price, right? That's fundamental. But given that I've done hundreds of RFPs for brands, like, pricing is typically very close, right? There might be a 5 or 10% spread. If you reach out to 5 or 6 or 7 3PLs, most will be around 5 or 10%. So not a huge difference, right? It's not like, trying to buy a car and going to 5 dealerships where like the prices will be kind of all over the map. So if you assume that price will be roughly the same with most providers, like, it's some of these intangibles. It's this partnership that's really important. And partnership, again, could be the communication, the culture, the style. Like, who are I have a brand right now that I'm working with that is visiting 3PLs as we speak, 3 different 3PLs in the New Jersey, PA area. And they said, like, what do we do when we show up? Like, what questions do we ask? Like, who do we talk to? And, of course, I had a handy 1-pager that I was able to share with them. But it's like, just talk to people, right? Like, know who the GM or the director of the facility is. Like, who is this person? Do you like him or her? Like, who are the ops managers? Like, Walker, it's just like a very much like a cult, I don't know. It's like, many of you may have gone to college, right? Like, when you go on site to like walk around the grounds, like, you just learn so much about like the culture of that community. So that is so important. And certainly part of culture is a 3PL's willingness or amenability to new software, right? And this is changing a lot, right? This is changing rapidly in the last few years. So brands that are willing to embrace, and not just willing, that are eager to embrace new technology, whether it's, super tech-enabled 3PLs like Stored, or, maybe it's, a third generation 3PL that's been around for 50 or 60 or, many years, where the new leadership is really embracing new technologies, right? Like, but aligning yourself with these folks who can help you kind of innovate. And as I said earlier, almost serve like a de facto consultant for your brand is really, really important. And like, that to me is priceless. If they're $1 more an order out the door, that'll still be cheaper than finding someone who might be the low cost leader, who's not, who's working with an old warehouse management system and who just doesn't embrace new technologies.
No, some really important points there. I will comment on one, which is, when I am asked by merchants in particular, like, what should I be looking for in a 3PL, right? Because I talk to a lot of merchants. One of the piece of advice I always give is, like, make sure you go see the facility or the facilities. Like, make sure you actually go, like, you shake people's hands, you see the environment. I think you can learn a ton about a 3PL by just walking the floor and meeting their employees, like, seeing how happy they are, seeing the, how organized or disorganized the facility is, like, seeing if everybody kind of understands what they're doing and, is really, looking like they're, enjoying coming into work every day. I think that's really, really critical. Chad, I'll learn to pick up on this. So you've obviously, been at Maiden, you've been at True Classic, you've evaluated a lot of 3PLs. When you're evaluating 3PLs, right? Like, Matt says he's got a cheat sheet for brands. Like, what's on that cheat sheet of, like, what are you asking? What are you trying to determine? What tips would you give to somebody just starting out on the brand side with less experience than you?
Yeah, for sure. At the risk of kind of restating some of the topics that Alex and Matt, you guys have hit on, like, we use the same analogies, right? Like, it's a marriage, and you're going to go through some tough times with that partner, and you need to know that you've got the right people on the other side of the phone or the other side of the relationship who are going to do right by you. I definitely still have a lot to learn in my career, but there's one lesson that I've learned the hard way and is never going to leave me, and that's finding partners. And once you find a partner, you stick with those people and you figure out how you guys can win together. We want our 3PL partners to win, just like we want to win. We want all of our partners to win, right? Like, we never want to be in a situation where our success is, taking a dollar out of somebody else's pocket to put it in ours and putting them at risk as a result, right? So, my main thing is kind of like some of the stuff that you talked about, Kyle. You want to spend time to get to know these people, and from the leadership that you're going to have to call on them when times are hard to ask for their support, but also the folks who are picking and packing your orders and are really the ones who are going to be the folks having the last hands on the product before it goes into a box, before your customer sees it, right? Like, all of those things are critically important, and invest time in building that relationship and fostering that relationship. Even in more stable times, although I don't know what that looks like with the last 5 years that we've had on the operator side, but things for startups change really quickly. And the business that we were at times when we signed a 3PL relationship to where the business we were by the end of that contract, we were very different, and things had changed a lot. And with all these exogenous sort of macroeconomic variables changing now ever more quickly, things are going to be tumultuous. And knowing that you have a partner on the other side of the equation who's going to stand up and help you out, and maybe at times not hold you to the letter of the law of the agreement, but understand that now things are different and we want to go in a different direction, is worth way more than getting an extra nickel out of a certain line item on the quote, right? So again, I know I'm not saying anything different than hasn't already been said, but like from a different perspective, it is just the most critical thing I've found thus far in my career in this industry.
Awesome. Thank you, Chad. I have one last question in this section, and then I think we'll go to Q&A. Alex, I just had to ask since we have you. Stored, obviously very well known for their in-house tech and everything you guys have been able to build there. It's really pretty remarkable if you look at the kind of history of the business. Can you just talk a little bit about decision-making process of like build versus buy? This is something that comes up a lot on our side of that. I would just love to hear kind of your perspective.
Yeah, I think when we're brands are evaluating Stored, they're asking if we have certain integrations, right? And okay, how are we partnering with those organizations to build closer relationships? And it's certainly part of the RFP process or the selection process of how well do you work with so and so vendor. But also on the build versus buy aspect, we will continue to be a commerce enablement company and build out aspects of our software and our tech stack for brands of all sizes, right? You could be someone that is 500 million in revenue a year that needs different aspects, but you could also have a brand that is just starting out and they just need a super simple solution. So we're always evaluating kind of the product roadmap, but also looking at things of, okay, how can we build this fast enough to create efficiencies, or can we partner with someone that has existing tech, leverage that relationship and gain those efficiencies even quicker? So evaluating that, the product team and their roadmap change constantly, like any software company, but the requests are coming from their brands, and we're listening to those brands on should we build or partner with someone and leverage that technology.
Thanks for that, Alex. All right, before we get to Q&A, I wanted to do one last fun kind of question here. So hoping not to put people on too much on the spot, but you can either pick a final piece of advice or a recommendation of someone that brand should be connecting with. Right, like we all know great people in this space. Like, who should brands be following or trying to talk to make sense of what's going on, or like what's the final piece of advice that you might have? Alex, you're nodding, so maybe I'll pick on you first.
I've been following Matt Hertz for a while now, and through the de minimis changes, IMEX changes, he's kind of been a voice of reason for me, and reading his opinions on the certain topics. But talk to other 3PLs, talk to other brands, and see what they're doing, and how they're approaching all these different changes and supply chain disruptions. But certainly follow my friend Matt here, and he's a great expert on a lot of these topics.
Awesome.
Yeah, I appreciate.
Matt, you want to go for next?
Yeah, I appreciate that, Alex. I do have a free newsletter, which I'll pop in the chat here, that covers topics, a lot of opinion, more opinion than fact at times, but nonetheless.
You gotta get your follower count back up after the last one. That was a little spicy.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, feel free to subscribe there. But yeah, I think certainly follow everyone on this call. The three, Alex, Kyle, and Chad on LinkedIn. At the very least, even just kind of following likes and comments. But yeah, I think the point is, like, no one really knows what's going on. There's a lot of rhetoric. There's very little facts out there. Things are changing by the hour and by the day, which maybe one, if it's a fact today, it may not be a fact tomorrow. So I think just kind of talking to folks in your community, like-minded, operators, founders, supply chain folks is really the best, resolve. And, the more conversations you have, the more webinars like this that you participate on, you really start to hear of, platforms and companies that can support your business that, maybe prior to this, you were unfamiliar with. So people are, tend to be very friendly in this, community. And, I'm sure Kyle and the team will kind of share our information. Happy to chat with anyone and kind of direct you to the right people if I don't have the answer for you.
Thanks, Matt. All right, Chad, I'll give you the last word here. Any final thoughts?
I was just thinking, as you guys were talking, as one call out, even going back to COVID, I don't know how Ryan Peterson over at Flexport seems to always have the inside track on, like, even the word coming out of Washington, but he is always at times, seeming to show up as a knowledgeable party on these, like, volatile changes. But at the risk again of just doubling down on what these guys have said, like, I can't tell you how valuable I find the network and how close this community of operators in this kind of commerce DTC enablement space is. And, like, the folks that I worked with back at Walmart are now in my same position at other companies, and I go to them. And Kyle, you and I met through the Haas network and, on a panel with these guys. And I just can't tell you how many times in this role I've just been totally humbled and had to come to somebody not knowing what the heck I was going to do, and had somebody who had dealt with that, 6 months earlier and could just help us at least start to understand the space and navigate through the uncertainty. And I'm just so thankful for that network and, building meaningful relationships. Like, if somebody needs help with a NetSuite item setup and I can help them out, like, I'm going to do that, because I know for sure 3 months later I'm going to have a question for them about something. So the answer to your question, Kyle, is, like, build relationships with as many people as possible that are going through the same pains and the same trials as you are, because it is a really valuable community.
Oh, I love that. I'll try to make this quick, but I couldn't agree more. Two boxes were about 3 years old. I mean, when we were starting out, frankly, Evan and I didn't really know much about returns. We thought there was a big problem because we kept seeing, facilities that, like Matt described. But I think my final piece of advice would be, don't underestimate the power of a specific request. So I think the first time I actually ever met Chad, I LinkedIn messaged him. We went to the same grad school, and had a very specific request I sent him. I think he followed up with me like same day or next day. So I think this community, to your point, Chad, is, like, extremely large, but very, open with sharing information, and everybody, I think, is for the most part very supportive. So I would just encourage folks on the call, like, you want to connect with somebody, you have a specific question, send them a note. You never know what you can learn from them and the relationship that can develop. So really appreciate that. We've got a few minutes left here. I wanted to hit 2 questions. So the first, maybe this is mostly for Chad. There's a question in the chat. I don't know if you can see it in the Q&A section. It says, if a China brand has 321 set up in Mexico and Canada, can they keep their inventory in those warehouses and just import formally? I want to know if this is any better or worse than moving to a bonded warehouse in the States. I guess maybe you guys have thoughts on that?
Yeah, and as we're starting to explore this as a brand who does still maintain a fulfillment presence in Mexico to take advantage of Section 321, our understanding is that yes, we do at least have some time frame remaining where we can import those under the de minimis threshold. Pretty well defined May 2nd for China product, although there is some grumblings that maybe that gets extended. And then, somewhat of a nebulous time frame for the de minimis thresholds to go away for other country of origins. So while there is potentially an end in sight, those benefits are still in place today. As we think about fulfillment in other geographies such as Mexico relative to bonded warehouses, FTZs. Bonded warehouses, you obviously have 5 years, so that's a pretty long time frame. FTZs, a much shorter time frame. I don't remember exactly what it is, but you've got to make a decision on clearing customs with those goods. Some bonded warehouses give you the ability to pay the duties at the time you remove your product. FTZs, you got to pay the duties that were in place at the time you entered the FTZ. So some implications there just on timing and policies that were placed in time at that time, just to keep in mind. But also watch the cost. Whereas there are quite a few of these locations in the U.S. for both bonded and FTZ types of facilities. That space is going to become more in demand and probably a bit pricier. So just keep that in mind relative to the storage cost in potentially other geos where you could park some product if needed.
Alex or Matt, anything to add on that?
Yeah, I think Chad, just to be clear, I don't know if this was the spirit of Keon's question, but I suspect that after May 2nd, pending nothing unforeseen, that given like country of origin is kind of the critical piece here, importing from China to Mexico and shipping from Mexico to the US end consumer would not be more beneficial or favorable than shipping from China to a US facility, be it bonded or otherwise, to the end consumer. In other words, like Mexico is not going to be this arbitrage opportunity via 321 that has existed over the last number of years. Is that accurate?
I would say that it does have a benefit, and at the end of the day, it depends on what you're trying to solve for, right? But I think the example of either a Canadian or Mexican-based facility and then fulfilling the product after the order's been placed by the customer gives you the option to defer the tariff until the customer's placed the order, which from a cash flow and a cash timing perspective could be meaningful. The trade-off being, are you okay with fulfilling that order from Canada or Mexico, where maybe it's a bit longer in transit to the customer? And I think that's a decision that a brand has to make at the end of the day.
Awesome. All right, we have, I think, time left for one question, and I'm going to shorten it because it's a longer question. And I think this is mostly for Chad. But we had a question ahead of the call, which was, as tariffs increase costs on imported goods, how are you approaching the decision of whether to pass those costs on to your customers? Are you going to increase prices or fees? And if you're not, what is success going to look like?
Just to answer quickly, I won't say that we won't eventually go down the path of reevaluating our pricing, but we are going to take the initial task of being better at operating and running the business such that we can absorb the additional cost and not have that be customer facing to continue to deliver the same value. So that's our first challenge, but it obviously depends on how policy goes. We're certainly not going to make a knee-jerk reaction to change pricing based on how things have been thus far. But going to do everything we can to not have that be customer impacting.
Awesome. Well, Chad, I think we're right on time, which is a record for anybody who knows me. So Alex, Matt, Chad, honestly, can't thank you guys enough. We put this together really quickly, and I think I learned a lot today. Hopefully, a lot of folks did today as well. We'll send out, contact information for these guys afterwards. Just take their LinkedIn profiles, etc. Please connect with them. And if you have questions for the 2Boxes team, you can always reach us online and shoot me a DM on LinkedIn as well. Hope everybody has a wonderful day. Thank you for joining us. Thanks again, guys, for your time. I really appreciate it. See y'all.